Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jessica. I'm a writer, enjoyer of TV, movies, books, comic books, and any other form of art or entertainment. So I've recently noticed that people have been watching my 2019 video on how to submit to literary magazines and get published, but a lot has actually changed since then in terms of the literary magazine landscape, but also my own personal approach to submitting my work. This video will not feature writing advice, so this is for people who have put in the work and who have a body of work that they feel like they're ready to submit to. If you don't know where to start, or if you've been doing this for a while and you've kind of hit a wall, this is the video for you. So my number one piece of advice, and the one I should have started with in my video in 2019, is to ask yourself, what is your goal? Being able to answer this question will really help you focus your energy towards the types of publications that will be best suited to your work, and it'll kind of save you a lot of the heartache and the stress of not getting what you want out of the process. So ask yourself, is it for readership? Is it for clout? Is it for credentials? And I will tell you right now, to save you the disappointment, that you won't get a lot of money from publishing in literary magazines, and it's not really something that you should really hinge your hopes and dreams on, although you can use it to build your career in other ways, and I'll discuss this a little bit later. You should also ask yourself whether you want to be published in more traditional and established literary magazines, such as the Paris Review, Granta, the New Yorker. These are usually more competitive with a big readership. They also usually sell subscription plans, and that's how they make money, and they usually have a couple more donors than the average small press would. Now, if you want to submit to small presses, this could include a range of magazines and zines. Sometimes they even call them micro presses. These are usually run by a small team or sometimes even one person. They have that DIY feel. Sometimes they're less competitive, although very popular small presses can also be very competitive, but on the whole, definitely less competitive because they usually have their own niches as well. And of course, there are also magazines that lie in between the spectrum, so you can really choose from a range of places that you think your work would be best fit in. I've also made this little table, which I hope is helpful in terms of what your goals might be and the things that you might want to look out for in terms of determining whether these are the things that are important to you. So for example, if you really want a wide readership, you might want to look at their print run, so how many copies that they publish and distribute with each issue, how many followers they have, although I put an asterisk in there because a large amount of followers might not translate into readers or engagement. If you're looking for clout, you might want to consider literary magazines that often submit their writers' works for award nominations, such as Pushcart nominations, which is the big one for poetry. If you're looking to publish in literary magazines for your writing credentials or your portfolio, then I would strongly encourage you to figure out the types of magazines that would kind of suit your needs best. So for example, if I'm based in London and I really want to apply to a bunch of London writing residencies, it might be a good idea for me to look at London-based literary magazines that kind of cater to that audience and that people would know and would recognize if I am applying to some London writing residencies. But on the other hand, if I want to be known as an environmental writer, then I would want to submit to places that are specifically catered towards environmental poetry, environmental fiction. So it's just kind of thinking a little bit strategically about what you want to be known for in your writing and submitting to places that will align with those goals. Are you in it because of the community? In which case you might want to check out the editorial team, have a closer look into who's running the magazine, whether they align with your values or not, and the types of people who are engaging with them online and on their social media. And of course, the last consideration is whether you want a literary magazine that is exclusively in print, exclusively digital, or somewhere in between. The benefits with print being that you can actually hold the magazine in your hands and you can have a physical copy of your work, which is always very nice to have. I've really cherished the ones that I've had published in print copies in the past. I feel like it gives an extra personal feel But at the same time, there are a lot of digital places these days that don't simply put up their poems on a website, they put it in a PDF file and they design it very beautifully. Some zines will do this, some online anthologies will do this as well. So they're definitely worth checking out. I would say the only risk of purely website-based literary magazines that don't kind of have digital files or PDFs of a specific issue is that you run the risk of the magazine suddenly shutting down and having no trace of your work on the internet anymore. So I would recommend, in that case, maybe take a screenshot just to save it, just to print it out and clip it on your wall, on your board somewhere. And the second consideration to have before I actually get into the details of where to find places to submit to is, how do you select your work? And I said this in my previous video, and I feel like my point still stands, so I'll keep this brief. I said that you could submit either by theme, so if they showcase a single consistent theme, you can submit those in a group, or you can submit it by range. If you have different styles of poetry that you want to showcase to the editor, you can also do that. And I said it's also a good idea to submit older and newer work together. Now, I say this because some people might find this a little controversial, but if you've had an older work that you've been editing for years and years and years, even for months and months, sometimes you just get tired of it. You've been trying to submit it to places, and it comes to a point where you're just like, this piece is not going anywhere. And even though we might still have potential, it feels a little stale to you, and you might be excited with your newer work. And you know, the best thing to do as a writer is to just keep writing and improving. So I feel like some of your newer work will have the skills that you've improved on, even subconsciously, along the way, even though it might not be as polished in terms of the way you've edited it. It might be something that you're more excited about, or maybe something that is thematically more appropriate to the magazine or the open call that you're submitting to. So I think ultimately just submit whatever you think would showcase the quality of your work best, and of course thematically matches the call of the open call and what they're looking for. So we're finally getting into the part of the video that I think was very much missing from my first video, and I feel like if you haven't watched that and you've come here today, this is probably the most important part of the process for me. So the number one thing that I am using so much more of now is databases and submission trackers. So two examples of this are ChillSubs and Submission Grinder. Both of these places keep the latest open calls published on their website, and you can categorize them by genre, by the type of work you're doing, whether it's poetry, playwriting, script writing, or prose, whether these magazines will pay you or not for your contributions, whether it's a competition or whether it's a specific open call. And I think the most important thing that both of these places do as well is provide you with an estimated response time for magazines, because how frustrating is it when you submit to a place and you haven't heard back for 3 months, for 6 months, and then it comes up to more than that, and you're just like, they are never going to get back to me. And both of these databases rely on people like us, people who submit to magazines, to provide that information of how long it took for a certain magazine to get back to you, whether the response was a yes or no. So they also calculate response rates, although I feel like you should take that more with a grain of salt. I'm just making an assumption here that it's going to be slightly skewed to those who are super active in the community who actually want to contribute to these databases. I would not recommend Submittable, which is what I recommended in my previous video, but I'm just telling you now, don't use that as a place to look for the latest open calls or new magazines, because I just find the platform a little bit outdated in that respect. And they are also kind of paid by the publishers and the magazines to have their open calls and their listings put through Submittable. So there's a little bit of a bias there towards the types of magazines that can afford to put their submissions on the website. I will still submit through Submittable because The magazines that do subscribe to the platform, sometimes they'll just like automatically take you to their submittable page, and that's kind of how you fill in your application forms and etc. etc. So if the magazine that I'm choosing uses the system, then I will use it, but I will not kind of go in there myself and look for new open calls, because I think there are better ways out there today. So my next tip to find new places to submit to is to actually broaden your expectation of what a literary magazine is. And in a lot of cases, maybe your work isn't best placed to a literary magazine. For example, I've had my poetry published in this anthology called All the Oils from Gingerbug Press, and I wouldn't call Gingerbug Press a literary magazine at all. They publish either small anthologies or small poetry collections, so I would call them like an independent publishing house. So once you start considering those in your search, you might find a lot of open calls for anthologies, even Kickstarters that do really great collections. For example, on like sci-fi poetry or urban fantasy or fantasy romance. They're a lot more targeted towards a specific niche or a topic usually, but I will say that they are also usually more likely to pay a contributor's fee because they're dedicated to putting this whole anthology together, they're going to print it, and they're going to promote it as they would a book. Another example I just thought of is the LGBT Press 14 Poems, which I actually did a short review of in one of my book review videos, but they have open calls every season, I think, for their next issue in their anthology, and they pay a small contributor's fee, and they're a great publisher. I feel like they're as professional and as kind of reputable as any other publishing house out there. So my final piece of advice is to do with submission guidelines and how it's such an important part of the process, because what you don't want is for all of your hard work to be thrown out the window at the very last step. So I covered this very briefly in my previous video, but now I feel like I've laid out 4 specific things that you need to pay attention to in your cover letter when you're submitting your piece. Number 1 is the title of your work and which open call you're submitting to. So is it the spring issue, the summer issue? Is it a specific competition they're running, or is it just their general submissions? Is it prose? Is it poetry? All of these things might have different editors behind them, and what you want to do is to just flag all the categories that your work fits into so that it gets read by the right person and it goes through the submission pile as smoothly as possible. The second thing is your third-person bio, and I'm sure you've seen this, but the general advice is to keep it short and simple, about 50 words. You can include some of your most recent publications in there, or the ones that you think are most representative of your work. Or if you haven't been published anywhere, you can also talk about what types of things that you like to write. So in terms of like genres and forms that you like to write in. So just say, "Hi, my name is Christian, and I really like poetry that deals with nature and the urban environment." I think something like that can just capture the essence of who you are as a writer. Number 3 is, if it applies to you, don't forget to list whether it's a simultaneous submission or not. And this means when you're submitting it to multiple places, it's usually good practice to tell the editor that, this is a simultaneous submission. The responsibility is on you to let them know if your piece has been submitted somewhere else, and you would need to pull that out of the running in the magazine that you've already submitted to. And finally, I would really advise you to include content warnings if they're applicable in your email. Some places might straight up tell you the things that they would like content warnings for and the things that they will simply not read, like much less publish. So please do pay attention to those. You don't want to be sending something that will kind of get your email immediately deleted and your name blacklisted because it goes against their guidelines very clearly. But I think even if they don't ask for it, it's good general practice to include content warnings for specific sensitive topics. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to this channel. I will be sticking around in 2023. I promise I've got a whole lineup of videos to come. And if you have any other questions about something I said in the video, or a question about something that I might not have covered this time around, please do let me know in the comments, and I'd be more than happy to address them in the next one. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!